ladies and gentlemen, and you're all very welcome to tonight's webinar, which has been brought to you tonight by the advisory staff here in County Mayo. My name is Brendan Garry. I work in Teagasc Ballinrobe, and tonight, for the next hour, I'm delighted to be your host for this special lambing webinar. Now, tonight, the focus switches to preparing for lambing, and at this stage, most farms haven't started lambing yet for a few more weeks, so hopefully you'll get some tips from tonight. Our first speaker will be Liam Quinn from Teagasc and Westport, and Liam is a dry stock advisor, and Liam will give us an update on how to manage yolks in the last few weeks of pregnancy. By later this evening, our guest speaker will be Damian Costello, well-known sheep specialist based in Teagasc Athenry, and Damian will give us a presentation on how to reduce lamb mortality, which will hopefully increase profitability on your farm. Now, you, the viewers this evening, are encouraged to engage with our panelists here tonight, and we ask you there that you can type in your question in the Q&A function. It'll be on the bottom of your phones, and later this evening, Vivian Silke, the Teagasc Regional Manager here in County Mayo, will put your questions live to the panelists here tonight. So type your questions into the Q&A box and we'll pick them up there later on. Now, this webinar is being recorded, like all our videos, and all our webinars are all available to watch back on the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel, and it'll be available in the coming days. So without further delay, I'm now going to ask Liam Quinn there to start sharing his presentation with us. And Liam, it's over to you.
So can you see that there, Brendan?
Yeah, that's perfect now, Liam. So yeah, you're good to go there. So over to you now, Liam.
That's perfect. So hello, my name is Liam Quinn, and I'm a dry stock advisor here in the Teagasc office in Westport. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. And tonight, I'm just going to talk a little bit about feeding ewes in late pregnancy. So why is ewe nutrition so important? So really what we're trying to achieve here is we want to reduce lamb mortality as much as possible and maximize the amount of lambs that we have for sale at the end of the year, whether it's through the factory or to a mart. So how are we going to do that? We need to monitor body condition score throughout the year, especially in the lead up to lambing. And ideally, we don't want to change body condition score in late pregnancy because the ewe is under enough pressure at that stage, and we just want to keep things as regular and as stress-free as possible. We need to feed according to litter size and lambing date. So litter size will be determined by scanning. So pin ewes according to singles, doubles, and triplets, and feed them accordingly. And lambing date then as well, we start to feed 6 to 7 weeks out from lambing to make sure that the ewe is meeting the requirements. We also want to ensure that the ewe has adequate colostrum. So protein is the big driver of colostrum production, and the likes of your soya bean in your ration, which we'll cover now in a few minutes as well. We want lambs to be optimum with their birth weights, and we'll have a look at that as well towards the end of the presentation. So first of all, their body condition scoring. We want ewes to lamb down at a condition score of 2.5 to 3. Now the scale runs from 1 to 5, which I'm sure most farmers are aware of. And just in the picture here, you can see this farmer running his ewes up through the race, body condition scoring them. It's very hard to body condition score a ewe just by looking at it. So really you need to get them up the race, feel them around the tail heads, and just make sure that there's adequate cover there. So looking for 2.5 to 3 at lambing. Just a point there, 1 unit of body condition is equal to 11 to 14% of the ewe's mature body weight. So now that's 6 to 8 weeks on average of fairly heavily feeding the ewe. And ideally we want to avoid doing this in late pregnancy. A few issues with low body condition score. Look, it's going to lead to weak lambs that are going to have struggle to meet their weaning weights, poor birth weights. So if you have low body condition score, the ewe is more than likely going to be low on colostrum, and this will have a knock-on effect on lambs. And ultimately, low body condition score is going to lead to higher mortality in ewes and in lambs. And then, we want to minimize body condition loss in late pregnancy. So the ewe has huge demands at this point. So definitely, we want to avoid this at all costs. So then the nutritional requirements. Concentrate feeding level is based on lambing date, forage quality, and litter size. So lambing date there, first of all, we're talking about feeding 6 to 7 weeks out from lambing, because that's when the ewe is under most pressure. Forage quality, cannot underestimate the importance of testing your silage or your hay to make sure that it's sufficient for the ewes. And even at that, your highest quality forage or hay will not be sufficient to meet the requirements of the ewe, especially if she's carrying doubles or triplets. Litter size then, of course, is determined by scanning. So, we'll pin according to singles, doubles, or triplets. Just a point there, 75% of fetal growth occurs in the final 7 weeks of pregnancy. So we need to be aware that the ewe is under huge demand at this point, and it's especially, her demands are high in energy and protein, where they increase by over 60% in the final 2 weeks of pregnancy. So if we just take energy there, for example, for a start, ewe needs 0.8 of UFL of energy, a dry ewe. Now that increases by over 60% in the final 2 weeks of pregnancy, up to 1.4 UFLs. So it's important to take this into consideration when you're picking your meals. Protein then likewise is a dry ewe, 130 grams per day is kind of sufficient for a dry ewe. Then that increases up to 215 in the final 2 weeks of pregnancy. So we really want to supplement protein and energy. These are the two main things that we want to supplement in the final 6 to 7 weeks before lambing. So just a graph here now. So as you can see here on the bottom, this is the ewes days in gestation, and this is the weights of the lambs. So you can see here early and mid-pregnancy, there's very little pressure on this ewe, but come 6 to 7 weeks into pregnancy, there's a huge, there's rapid fetal growth. And you can see here, lambs hitting their target weight at 5 kilos at this stage. So we really need to feed concentrates at this point. And why do we need to feed concentrates? So you can see from this diagram here that at week 12, the lamb is just starting to form inside the ewe, and the rumen is here to the left of that. There's no pressure on the rumen at this stage. So the ewe can meet her full intake, and she's not under any pressure at this stage. When you go to week 20, then the lamb is really starting to form inside the ewe. Possibly there's 2 lambs in there at 5 kilos each, plus you have the birthing fluid of 7 kilos. So this is really putting pressure on the rumen. So this is affecting the intake then in the ewe. So we need to feed concentrates to make up for this loss in capacity in the rumen. So in short, the lambs are getting bigger, the energy requirements are getting higher, and the capacity is reducing in the ewe. So this is why we have to feed concentrates. So just a silage sample there now. This would be typical of what's going through the offices at the minute from silage analysis. DMD is the main measure we use here. So at 69%, it's a fairly good silage sample. Just all the measures there. Dry matter at 29%. So it was obviously very good weather when it was being made. pH and ammonia at 4.4 and 6.6. So very good, well-preserved sample of silage. Ash at lower than 8%, which is what you want to see. Digestible forage at 50.4. Ideally, you might like to see that a little bit lower, but it's not that bad. Energy at 9.9 is good, and crude protein at 12%, slightly low as well. Probably if you had leave here grass to cut, that would increase maybe up on 16%. Down here, then the main things we look for down here, the UFL. So I talked about UFLs a moment ago. As you can see, this sample is 0.77. So this further emphasizes the fact that you need to feed meal because energy requirement is very high, and the intake as well at 109. It's very good on this sample. So a good palatable sample. So high intakes. Feeding management then. So look, for example, if we just take a 75 kilo ewe receiving 70 DMD silage and good quality concentrates, you're talking about your 19 to 20% crude protein concentrate. Just an important point, forage is insufficient even at the highest quality to meet the requirements at this stage. So we really need to get in there with meal. So just on the table here, you can see scan glitter size. So this is for ewes carrying singles, twins, or triplets. Then the weeks out from pregnancy and how much to give them, and the total concentrates. So if we just take a ewe of 75 kilos carrying 1 lamb and receiving 70 DMD silage. So we need to start supplementing that yolk with 19 to 20% crude protein concentrate, 200 grams 6 to 5 weeks out from pregnancy, 400 grams 3 to 4 weeks out, and 600 grams a week to 2 weeks before lambing. So a total intake there of 17 kilos of concentrates. A yolk then carrying doubles. 200 grams 78 weeks out, 400 grams 6 to 5 weeks out, 600 grams 3 to 4 weeks out, and a week to 2 weeks from lambing, 800 grams. A total concentrate usage of 28 kilos. Finally, then triplets. So this it's getting that little bit more because she's under more pressure. She's rearing 3 lambs or growing 3 lambs. 400 grams 78 weeks out, 600 grams 6 to 5 weeks out, 800 grams 3 to 4 weeks out, and 800 grams there again at a week to 2 weeks before lambing, giving a total concentrate usage of 36 kilos. And it's just important to note from this table here that meal is being built up gradually as the lamb is getting bigger. So we're feeding based on requirements, and trying to reduce the onset of acidosis as much as possible by building that feed up gradually. Feeding management, then again, look, we want to remove stale or refuse material twice weekly. Ideally, you'd like to be doing that a little bit more. So as you can see here from the picture, the ewes eating the forage, we want to be getting maximum amount of intake from that forage. So, good clean forage in front of them at all times and maximizing intakes. So you want to feed twice daily where you're feeding over 500 grams per head per day. And you want to feed them at consistent feeding times. So we'll say, for example, if you're feeding triplet bearing ewes, giving them 1 kilo on the lead up to lambing, 500 grams at 9 o'clock in the morning and 500 grams again at 6 o'clock in the evening. Ideally, you want to be leaving 8 hours between feeds, and that's just to prevent the onset of acidosis again and digestive upsets in the ewes. Clean water then as well. Of course, it's very important. So 6 liters per day is what is the general intake. We have a very dry feed and dry concentrates. A good rule of thumb with the water, unless it's clean enough to drink yourself, then really the ewes shouldn't be drinking it. So clear out the troughs of any defecations or stale silage or stale hay. Keep it clean at least once a day. Make sure that the ewe is satisfying her thirst every time that she goes to the trough. And separate child feeders then as well. Or maybe a ewe that's overindulgent as well. Keep an eye out for them. Separate them out. If they're shy, give them a little bit extra, and if they're overindulgent, maybe just restrict them a small bit. But make sure that they're definitely getting their required amount. So then we want to balance nutrition. So we don't want to overfeed or underfeed the ewes in the lead up to lambing. So underfeeding is going to lead to light, weak lambs. So they're going to be more susceptible to hypothermia. And, we want to avoid that at all costs. Thin ewes. Now, we have to remember when ewes lamb down that they're going to have to go out to grass. So their energy requirements when they go out to grass jumps again because they're rearing, we'll say, either a lamb, 2 lambs, or 3 lambs. And, body condition score has to be right there, because if the ewe doesn't have condition on, her reserves go back into herself rather than going back into feeding the lambs that she has to rear. This has a knock-on effect then as well, of course, poor quality colostrum and possibly inadequate colostrum, which is going to affect the lambs, and, poor live weight gains during the summer when they're out of grass. Of course, we want to try and avoid twin lamb disease. So that's just a negative energy balance in the diet. And, ultimately that leads to higher mortality as well, and we want to avoid that. Overfeeding then, so look, it restricts placental development. So we want to avoid that where lambs are forming inside the ewe. And then large lambs and difficult births. Definitely at a very labor intensive time of the year, we want to avoid this, trying to get the hold of the vet. And, it's more stress on animals and more stress on the farmer or the shepherd and you want to avoid that, especially at a very busy time of year. So what to look for in concentrates? So we're looking for a balanced ration. So the likes of your energy, protein, fiber, and minerals. So good sources of energy would be the likes of your barley and your maize, and your protein, ideally your soybean meal is what you want to see there. Ideally in your ration list, soybean meal should be listed, you know, in the first 2 to 3 ingredients, because it's a very good protein source and it'll drive colostrum. Fiber then, a lot of it will be got through your forage, but you know, minerals, hugely important as well. The likes of your calcium, your magnesium, any trace elements such as, you know, copper, cobalt. You know, if you're in doubt about your minerals, you can always get a mineral analysis done of your silage. And if you're still in doubt, you can get blood tests done of the ewes, and just to make sure that they're definitely receiving all the minerals that they need. So as the target, we want to 100 grams of soybean per head per day per lamb carried in the final 3 weeks of pregnancy is a good guide. Now, where ewes are receiving a 20% ration, you know, this is probably being achieved. You can be fairly sure that it is being achieved. But where you might be feeding a slightly poorer quality ration, this is a good target to keep in mind, just to make sure that they're getting that protein into the diet, which will lead on to colostrum production. So this is driven by pre-lamb nutrition, and you know, colostrum production is so important for getting good weights on lambs at grass. And you know, ultimately you don't want them hanging around too long during the summer. So the sooner they can get going, the better. So the ingredients then, so this table here just shows high energy, medium energy, and low energy ingredients. So your high energy is the likes of your cereals, maize, barley, oats, and wheat. Your pulps, citrus, and beet. Your soybean meal, it's a good source of energy, but you know, very important from a protein point of view as well, hugely important. And we'd like to see it in the first 2 to 3 ingredients. Distillers grains, peas and beans, molasses, and oil. Then your medium sources, the likes of your maize gluten, soya hulls, and rapeseed meal. You know, ideally not too far up in your list, but you know, some soya hulls is a good source of fiber, so you know, it has its part to play as well. Then your low energy feeds, you know, your wheat feed, palm kernel, sunflower, oat feed, and cottonseed. These are the ingredients that you don't want to see high up in your list. So, you know, low inclusion rates of these feeds are very important, or these ingredients are very important when you're looking at your ration label. And just to note down at the bottom there, ration labels. So ingredients are listed by inclusion rate in descending order. So, you know, your first 2 to 3 ingredients are very important because they make up the most of your ration. And then again, soybean in the first 2 to 3 ingredients, very important for colostrum. Space requirements then. So very important, your pen floor space and your feeding space. So if you just take a typical ewe, 90 kilos, and if you're housing her on slats, you're talking about 1.2 meters squared, and where you're bedding on straw, possibly 1.4 meters squared. A medium ewe at 70 kilos, 1.1 meters squared, and where she's bedded on straw, 1.2 meters squared. A small ewe, 50 kilos, 1 meter squared, and 1.1 where they're being bedded. So just a slight increase there where you're bedding on straw rather than using slats, and it's just important to be wary of that. Feeding space then, hugely important as well. So if we take that ewe, 90 kilos, if we're feeding her meal, she needs 600 millimeters of feed space, and if it's just roughage, 200 millimeters. A 70 kilo ewe, she needs 500 millimeters of feeding space where meal feeding, and 200 where she's just receiving roughage. And then that small ewe, 50 kilos, 400 millimeters where meal feeding, and 175 where she's just receiving roughage. Now, these sheep pens are very common across the country, and you know, they do serve a great purpose, but these corners here are very deceiving to the eye. And it's just very important to be wary that if ewes are feeding along this face here, that she's actually stopping 2 ewes from feeding at the corner here. So ideally you want to measure your pins and do out your space right, make sure that every ewe has adequate space, and always observe ewes when you're feeding them to make sure that there's none of them shying back, because if there's a ewe that's shying back, it's usually the same ewe, and that's the ewe that can run into problems when lambing. So are you getting your late pregnancy nutrition right? Well, the way to find that out is to weigh your lambs at birth and to find out if they're meeting these target birth weights. So for lowland flocks, single weights is 6 kilos, double weights is 5 kilos, and triplets are 4 kilos. And then on a hill flock, single ewe, 5 kilos, and a double ewe, 4 kilos. So ideally you want these lambs this weight, and then a ewe full of good quality colostrum, ready to hit the ground running and get the lambs gaining weight as soon as possible. So just in summary then, a few key points. So body condition score, monitor it throughout the year, but ideally don't make any huge change to body condition score in late pregnancy or to lead to problems. You want to balance your nutrition, so the type of your forage quality, your lambing diet, and the amount of lambs that the ewe is carrying are hugely important here. We want to strike the balance right, not overfeed and not underfeed. Good quality concentrates with soybean, very important, included in the mix for colostrum production. And we also want to ensure that adequate feed space per ewe. So, if you have shy ewes or ewes that may be overindulgent, separate them out and restrict them a small bit or give them a small bit extra where needed. So just a final point there, look, inputs have increased dramatically since last year. So the likes of your feed, your fertilizer, and your diesel have gone up an awful lot. But your nutrition is not the place to make the cuts. So, the pros will far outweigh the cons when you have live, healthy lambs for sale next year. So definitely don't skimp on the your nutrition. So that's it for me. I'll hand you back to Brendan now, and I'll take any questions at the end.
Thanks very much there, Liam. That's a brilliant presentation there. So I'll just get you just to stop sharing your presentation there now. And it's just an opportunity there for our viewers there this evening. We have a lot of viewers, over 100 farmers logged on this evening. So, please put your questions in there to the Q&A tab, and we will get Vivian there to pick them up at a later stage after Damian's presentation. So now at this stage, I'm going to call on Damian Costello, the sheep specialist based in Athenry in County Galway, and Damian now is going to talk to us about how to prevent lambing mortality. And Damian has some interesting videos there that he's going to show us that have been produced by the sheep department. So Damian, over to you now.
Okay, thanks, Brendan. Are you seeing the presentation all right there?
That's perfect, Damian. Yeah, lovely stuff.
Very
Thanks
good.
Million.
Okay, good evening, everybody. As Brendan said, Damian Costello is my name. I'm based here in Athenry as a sheep specialist. And I think Liam has set the scene very well there in terms of the pre-lambing story and the importance of getting pre-lambing nutrition right. So I suppose I'll take up the story now from the lambing time onwards. And what I want to focus on, I suppose, is looking at ways that we can maybe reduce the lamb mortality in the lambing season. It's probably fair to say that you're not going to save them all, I suppose, but how can we, what measures can we put in place at farm level to give them, I suppose, the best chance of survival? So in terms of what we know, I suppose, about mortality, it can be influenced by a number of things, as we mentioned, as Liam outlined. Nutrition really sets you up very well for having good optimal birth weight lambs that are going to be viable. But on the balance of that, you don't want lambs that are too big, which will lead to lambing difficulty and so on. The other thing, I suppose, then about getting your nutrition right is that you'll avoid the likes of metabolic disorders such as twin lamb disease and milk fever and so on. And for my presentation, I'm going to have a look at a few areas such as hygiene, certain flock health issues and management issues around the lambing. So just in terms of lamb mortality, over half the lambs that don't make it die during the first day of life really are at birth. And there are farms that are consistently achieving, 10% or less mortality up to weaning. And I suppose it's important just to say, when we talk about mortality, we're talking about, I suppose, the lambs that are there at scanning time versus the lambs that are there at weaning time or available for sale off the farm. And higher scanning flocks, it's fair to say, can be maybe 10, 12% or higher, whereas maybe flocks that don't scan that high or haven't a very prolific flock of ewes are probably achieving a good bit better than the 10%. So 10% is a good average target to keep in mind. So what are the causes, of these lamb losses? And the pie chart there is just a representation. It's based on work that was carried out by Dwayne Shields here in Athenry as part of his PhD, where he basically post-mortemed any lamb that was lost over 2 lambing seasons in the flocks here in Athenry. They were sent to the regional veterinary lab for post-mortem. And not to get into too much detail of the study, but I think the key point is there that you see the big blue area there, 38%. 38% of the deaths of the lambs that went to the regional veterinary labs were caused by infection of some sort. And a further 15% then were caused by dystocia, which is lambing difficulty, or maybe lambs too big, or they died as a result of difficult lambings anyway. So that accounts for over half of the mortalities. And I suppose again, these are things, I suppose, that are within our control and potentially preventable. And as I said at the start, we're probably not going to save them all, but in terms of preventing these, paying a bit closer attention to really top quality hygiene, this is essential to minimize, I suppose, the risk of infection for newborn lambs. Colostrum is very much key, and as Liam outlined, having ewes with enough of colostrum to start with is the first step, and the second step is ensuring that all the lambs get enough colostrum as soon as possible after birth. And then in terms of difficult lambing, again, having your ewes in correct body condition and the correct plane and nutrition, so that you have these lambs that are born at the optimum birth weight. So in terms of hygiene,
sorry, Damian, just 1 second there, Damian. You might just call out the heading there, because for each slide, because there's a black line just going across that column. So just call out what the heading is there, just for our viewers.
Okay. Or is that any better there now? No.
That's better now, Damian. Yeah. It's moved to the bottom. That's the only thing now. That's all.
Screen sharing. I'm just trying to get rid of it altogether, but it won't move. Okay. As I say, we can. I don't know. Has it disappeared when we were on the trial run? It's just on the. Okay, so the heading there anyway. Sorry, I'll carry on, Brendan. Thanks for that.
Yeah, just put on your camera again, Damian. That's all. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, no. Yep.
That's okay.
So hygiene, in terms of hygiene at lambing, I suppose the first thing we'd say is the actual if ewes are being lambed indoors, that the group pens that they're in for lambing, I suppose they should be well bedded at all times, in particular around the lambing time. And from there, in the indoor lambing situation, most people will be moving the ewes and newborn lambs into individual lambing pens. And I suppose if you think of the lamb inside the ewe during pregnancy, it's a very sterile environment, and little or no exposure to infection, bar, let's say, abortion agents or something like that. But it's unlikely that they will come in contact with infection. So it's a shock to the system when they arrive on the ground. So it's really important to try and create as hygienic an environment as possible. So in terms of the individual pens, again, the gold standard really, I suppose, is having these set up in advance of lambing, a bit of lime plus plenty of straw, so that you're creating a barrier between any harmful bugs, between those and the lamb or lambs. and they should be cleaned out after each use. So really taking the few forkfuls of waste straw away, sweeping out the pen, putting down your lime or whatever other disinfectant powder that you might use, and rebedding the pen with plenty of straw. Again, important that these lambing pens are in a well ventilated shed, because a damp environment doesn't make for keeping dry bedding and so on. So it shouldn't be drafty, but it should be well ventilated at the same time. In terms of the lambing equipment, then I suppose, and if you're intervening with a lambing and assisting yaw, it's paramount that arm length gloves are used when you're assisting any yaw at lambing time, and making sure that they're clean as well, that you're not introducing any infection into the yaw. Again, using lubricant is recommended, so that you can slip out lambs with the minimum of fuss, I suppose. So it is, again, your own personal hygiene, even in terms of your clothes and things, should be changed fairly regularly, that your outer clothes are not a source of infection for lambs as well. And I just have a video coming up there during the lambing time. Oftentimes we're using lambing aids and lambing ropes and various different equipment, such as stomach tubes. And again, it's really important that these are sterilized after use. And as Brendan mentioned to start, we have a couple of videos, and hopefully they'll play okay. But the video I have here is just produced by my colleague Michael Goldstein, and it's just a simple look at a very simple and cheap method of sterilizing your equipment. So I'll just let it play. It's only about 2 minutes, and we're
not transferring infection from ewe to ewe or from lamb to lamb in the feeding or the lambing process. Michael Gottstein, Sheep Specialist with Teagasc. I'm here today to talk about our 3-bucket system for cleaning and sterilizing all your lambing equipment. So during lambing time, we're going to have lots of different equipment. We'll have lamb pullers, lamb ropes, stomach tubes, syringes, bottle feeders, and it's important that basically once we use them, that we're able to properly clean them and sterilize them, so that we're not transferring infection from ewe to ewe or from lamb to lamb in the feeding or the lambing process. So our first bucket basically consists of a bucket with some washing up liquid inside it, clean water and washing up liquid. And the purpose of this is really to clean everything. So we're cleaning our lambing ropes, we're cleaning our stomach tubes inside in this, our syringes, by just basically sucking up and making sure that they're good and clean, maybe having a brush as well for our bottles and our bottle feeders. Our second bucket in the system just contains clean water. That's all we have inside that, and really all we're doing here is we're rinsing out. We're just rinsing out the equipment, getting rid of the surplus suds and the washing up liquid. Our third bucket contains our sterilization fluid. So this is a 5-litre bucket. This sterilization fluid requires 1 capful per 5 litres. It lasts for 24 hours, provided we keep it clean, and that's the reason why we're cleaning everything before we get here. And it sterilizes the equipment in 15 minutes. So all our equipment is basically put into this sterilizing fluid. Again, we need to suck the fluid up into the stomach tube. We need to suck it up into the syringes. If we're sterilizing our bottles, the same story. Go through the 3 buckets. This is a clean bottle, and then put it into the sterilizing fluid, fill it up to the top, and then leave it inside there for 15 minutes. And once the 15 minutes is up, it'll be sterile. You can leave it in there for the day, and every morning then we change out our 3 buckets, empty out what's inside, and refill them, and we're ready again for the next 24-hour period. Just when we're using the equipment again, just empty out the sterilization fluid. There's no requirement to rinse it out. When we put our milk into that bottle, or the same for the stomach tube, just empty out the sterilization fluid, empty it out of the actual tube as well, and it's ready now for use.
Okay, so as I said, that's just a summary of the sterilizing of the equipment. I suppose when it comes to the feeding of the lamb, or the initial feed of the lamb, it's important really that we cannot underestimate the importance of the first feed and getting enough of colostrum into the lamb. And as Liam already outlined, the appropriate feeding for the ewe to make sure that she has enough of colostrum to start with. But the colostrum has three functions really. The first and foremost, it's a feedstuff. It's an energy source. Secondly, it's a laxative. It cleans out the intestines and that of the lamb. And thirdly, I suppose, and maybe most importantly, it's a source of immunoglobulins, and these are the antibodies that the lamb will use to fight infection. And we talk about the importance of the first feed. The absorption of these antibodies when the colostrum enters the lamb's gut or intestines, the antibodies are absorbed into the bloodstream via the intestinal wall. And that's at its maximum in the early hours of the lamb's life. And once they receive their first feed, the level of absorption starts to decline. So I suppose the last thing we want is some people going away from this evening thinking that just because there's a stomach tube in the photograph up at the top there, that we're advocating stomach tubing every lamb. If the lamb or lambs get up and suckle this colostrum directly from the mother, assuming she has lots of it, happy days. That's what we want to see. But there are cases, I suppose, where intervention is needed and you need to stomach tube the lamb. And as Michael mentioned in his video there, that it's important that the stomach tubing equipment is sterile. But we've often had discussions with on-farm events where people will say, how much colostrum would you give a lamb if you're stomach tubing him? So if you take the average twin lamb that's 5 kilograms at birth weight, that lamb needs 250 mils of a first feed. And you can see in the photograph there, oftentimes these plastic syringes are used to administer the colostrum through the stomach tube. So the 5 kg lamb needs 4 of these 60 mil syringes in a first feed, and it's important that they get that. And as I outlined, one of the main reasons for that is that that's when they'll be at their maximum in terms of absorption of these antibodies or immunoglobulins into the bloodstream. The other part there it mentioned at the end in terms of substituting with supplement or substitute colostrum. If your ewe hasn't enough, if you take the ewe that lambs down with 3 lambs and you feel she won't have enough of colostrum for the 3 of them, the proper thing to do really is to milk out the ewe completely and mix up your substitute colostrum and add it to the ewe's colostrum and mix the whole lot up and divide it between the 3 lambs, ensuring they get their 200 or 250 mils each. But you're ensuring there that every lamb has at least got some ewe's colostrum. The temptation sometimes can be to feed the first 2 lambs and just give the third lamb the substitute colostrum. And the third lamb really is probably, his immunity is going to be compromised because he hasn't got any ewe's colostrum. I have another just a very short video. Hopefully, I have time there, Brian, in terms of giving a glucose injection. This is where the you have a hypothermic lamb, and this is a chart that was taken from AHDB, and it's just a useful chart in terms of assessing what to do with if you come on a lamb that's panned out. He's maybe pretty much comatose. It may not be a newborn lamb. It could be a lamb a day old that just has got cold. So if you feel that the lamb is hypothermic, take the temperature of the lamb. If it's below 37 degrees, it's severe hypothermia. Then you assess the age of the lamb. If it's a young lamb or it's a fairly newborn, you can probably dry the lamb and warm him in a warming box and feed him subsequently. However, if the lamb is 5 hours old or more, the chances are that his energy reserves, when the temperature dropped, he has burned up his natural energy reserves rather quickly. So if you go to either heat that lamb or stomach tube him, the consequences are generally fatal. The first step with a lamb like that, that's hypothermic and that's more than 5 hours old, is to administer a glucose injection. And the best way to get that into them is by an intraperitoneal injection. And this video from the UK, just again, a 2-minute clip, describes how that procedure takes place. So I'll just let that run. It's just a quick.
Yeah, that's okay, Damian. Yeah, we'll have to, maybe we have a lot of questions here, so we'll have to.
Hypothermia is a big killer of little lambs, where they get low blood glucose due to not having fed or extreme weather conditions. And the thing to treat them is to bring them to a hot box to get them warmed up, and before that we'll give them a glucose injection into the abdomen to give the glucose a boost. They absorb that very quickly, and within half an hour they're normally up and running. We'll show you how to. Hypothermia is a big killer of little lambs, where they get low blood glucose due to not having fed or extreme weather conditions. And the thing to treat them is to bring them to a hot box to get them warmed up, and before that we'll give them a glucose injection into the abdomen to give the glucose a boost. They absorb that very quickly, and within half an hour they're normally up and running. We'll show you how to administer that just now. So once you've got your warm 30 ml of dextrose solution, Ed, if you can just suspend the lamb by its front legs, and you place a 19 gauge 1-inch needle. Here's his navel, it's been sprayed, which is a good thing. You go 1 inch below the navel and 1 inch to the side. Width of a man's thumb is about 1 inch. So we'll stick it in there, and you want to be angling it towards the lamb's tail head to get in the free peritoneal space. So just angle it in like that, and then connect the solution and inject your product, and then just administer the solution. And the lamb can now be transferred to hot box, and in about half an hour to an hour's time he should be fed with some milk once he's warmed up to temperature. Once he's been in the hot box half an hour to an hour, if you feel his mouth, take his temperature, check he's warm. When he's warm and active, then you can stomach tube him with milk to give a bit more energy.
Okay, apologies about the video there, it just paused me. Brendan, I just very briefly for 1 minute mention a few of the issues. If there's any questions on these afterwards, we can take them, but I'm not going to go into any great detail other than to say, you know, these are the type of issues, the likes of abortion, you know, the metabolic diseases, infection, you know, that can cause issues and can cause mortality. In the case of abortion, I suppose the only way really to establish what has been the cause of the abortion is to collect a fresh sample of the aborted material, and as much as you can, into a clean sack. Contact your vet about getting it into the regional veterinary lab, and you can make a plan if it is. I suppose in the case of abortion, you kind of hope for the best and fear the worst. So the O that a birth should be isolated, and again to contact your vet and about submitting a sample. In terms of the metabolic diseases, you know, as Liam outlined earlier on, appropriate nutrition and good feeding management will take care of most of these. And if you have a high incidence of any of them, it's probably merits further investigation. The likes of the giant ill or navel ill is certainly, disinfecting the navels with an iodine or a chlorhexidine solution is the way to go there. It's certainly recommended. In terms of the watery mouth and the scour, again, adequate colostrum is really the answer to these issues. And there's a couple of other genetic issues, such as the enteropion and those which inturned eyelids, and again, important to treat them, and also important if they're genetic, that you don't keep these animals for further breeding. Again, just very briefly, I suppose, as I said, the short-term sort of actions to take, that you address your hygiene, your nutrition. In the longer term, you're looking at, as Liam outlined earlier on, a good feeding regime, watching the condition score, any adjustments that are needed to housing in terms of feed space. There may be a vaccination program needed if there's issues with infectious abortion. So, if you have any, lab reports or that kind of thing, or if there's any follow-up sampling required, it's very important to examine the results, to talk to your vet, seek advice and act on the advice. And the last point I'd make in terms of records, some people shudder when we talk about keeping records at lambing time, in that it's a really busy time. But even if it was a simple thing of having a number of cull tags where there, we'll say, problem ewes, or ewes that we'll say have prolapsed, or ewes that have lambed down with very little milk, or ones that you feel are going to cause problems in the future, that you just stick a cull tag in their ear, and that they're not going to get any second chances. I think we'll leave it at that, Brendan, and as I say, I'll just stop sharing the screen here, and if there's any questions. So apologies for going over time a little bit.
Thanks very much there, Damian. Yeah, so look at thanks very much there to Damian and Liam for two excellent presentations and some great videos there. So now at this stage of the evening, we have lots of questions in there. We'll try and get to as many of them as we can. And at this stage, I'm now going to hand it over to our Regional Manager, Vivian Silke, who will put your questions to our panelists. So over to you, Vivian.
Thank you, Brendan, and thanks to Damian and Liam for presenting. We have a lot of questions, guys, so as much as you can, quite brief answers. We may not get to them all this evening. I must add that before we start. So the first two, Liam, are more or less for your presentations. We'll deal with them first. And I suppose this is a relative one, and it could affect a lot of our viewers. So in terms of a 500 gram limit for a single bearing ewe, is that enough if she's 100 kilos?
So it would be, yes. I definitely wouldn't go over 600 grams anyway. As long as she's getting the right amount of nutrition there before lambing, there should be no issue. But definitely over 600, I definitely be splitting the feeds just to make sure.
Okay. And the next question is somewhat related, and I think we've worked from both bovines and ovines, so both sheep and cattle on this one. Is there a reason why lambing occurs at night, and is there anything a farmer can do to prevent this?
So there has been talk that feeding later at night brings on pregnancy, or brings on calving during the day, but there wouldn't be any scientific evidence to prove that. To be fair, if light goes off, ewes kind of tend to settle, and then they may be more inclined to wait until morning to lamb down, but there wouldn't be any evidence to prove it.
Okay, so maybe even for a farmer himself, I know with the cows anyway, that if you feed late at night, say 11, 12 o'clock, the last feed, you usually don't have any activity till about 6 o'clock in the morning. It might work in certain cases, so it's trial and error there with the sheep.
Yeah. There's so much, if I could just come in, Vivian, there's so much anecdotal evidence, I suppose, on the sheep side, as Liam said there, that if there's minimal disturbance during we'll say the night, if yours say are checked at 12 or 1 o'clock and there isn't much happening in terms, and they've settled down for the night, it seems if they're left undisturbed, that it's nearly when daylight starts to break again but there can be exceptions to that rule. It's not something you could you could sort of say for definite will work, but there's some anecdotal evidence. And as you said, in the cattle world, the feeding time has been shown to influence it, but it's difficult to achieve that, I think, in the sheep side of things.
Okay, and the next two questions, Liam, are again related to the diet, and they're more or less the same questions, so I'll just ask it once. And due to the mild winter we've had, there's a lot of heavy covers of grass out there, and if you order them in say middle of March, a month's time, there may be some animals still on grass. So on that basis, I have yours on great grass currently. How would the meal allocation compare to if the owl was actually housed at the same stage? So in terms of, is it more meal or less meal they may need if the grass is very strong at the minute?
Yeah, so look, keep a very good eye on body condition score, and good grass. You can't beat it. Spring grass now you're talking about 1.15 UFLs on average this time of year. So I'd still be inclined to win with a bit of meal just to make sure for colostrum production and that. But it's hard to beat grass if you have it. Definitely use it.
Okay, so just keep an eye on body conditions, probably the best hint you can give there.
Yeah.
Okay, Damian, just you might handle this one, please. I have Yo that's carrying thin Yo that's carrying triplets. She's currently on silage and meal. She's been well looked after, so she's been dosed and so on. Is there anything else that this viewer can do to boost up the Yo? She's about 2 weeks from Lemming and she's getting a little bit shook as triplets do.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, there are certain sheep, I suppose, that maybe put a lot of their body reserves into the lambs. It's very difficult, and Liam mentioned it earlier. It's very difficult to build body condition score at this stage. I think the best you can hope for is to try and maintain her. You'd be probably looking at feeding maybe a half a kilo twice a day, so she's up on a kilo, assuming that the silage is reasonable quality. The other thing, to look at, I suppose, is there a decent amount of soya in the ration? If there isn't, a small bit of soya supplementation along with that could help to ensure that it's unlikely she's going to improve body condition score at this stage, but at least if she lambed down with a decent amount of milk, you'd have done something, I suppose. But very difficult to build because she's a lot of demands, I suppose, at this time of the year.
Yeah, maybe if you have a number of triple bearing Yos, if possible, maybe to put them on a pin in their own to give them
separate them out.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and very often, I suppose, people, if people that would have twins in that situation, maybe a number of twins, if they were even moved onto the feed regime of the triplets, but they could be separated if there was a number of them, as you say, if they could be separated out and fed a little bit extra.
Okay, and it's a related question there, it was somewhat different. And please attempt to answer it if you can. It's more of a veterinary question, but I have Yo that's carrying twins. She's 2 weeks away from Lemming. She's lying down forcing on a daily basis, and any explanation what is causing this?
Yeah, it could be a number of things. It sounds a little bit like it sounds a little bit like one that's about to prolapse, but there's any number of reasons why a lamb might prolapse, but you'd be looking at things like has she enough of feed space? Is there regular amount of roughage regular roughage available to her? The only other thing it could be is some form of infection, that is for whatever reason she has picked up an infection. But keep an eye on her that if she's forcing, it might be no harm in a prevention basis if you had a prolapse harness or something to put on her. It might stop her, but it's possibly some a veterinary consultation, maybe, as you said, Vivian.
Yeah, okay, and somewhat maybe probably from a hill farmer to this question, because it's commonly used there. I have Yo's lemming in about 6 weeks' time. They're on a mineral booster. Are these any help to keep the O's on track?
A bucket.
Sorry, bucket, Damian.
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry,
Damian.
Look, again, I mean, the mineral bucket is important. It depends on if they're outdoors. There was a comment made recently there, was if they were outdoors on reasonably good grass, they can be, it can be, you know, it can be almost adequate, and if they're in good body condition. But certainly, you know, if there's a certain proportion of them carrying twins, they probably would need a little bit of supplementary feeding at this stage, and single bearing ewes if it's on the hill. I would still be inclined to try and get some supplementary feeding into them for the last month anyway before lemming.
The second video that you played, Damian, would you recommend that obviously a person hasn't experienced this, would you recommend that I give the glucose injection to lambs myself, or do I go for the vet?
Yeah, look, it's a good question. You certainly want to know what you're doing. It's not I suppose it's not an antibiotic or anything you're administering. The video is available there on YouTube if anyone wants to have a look back over it again. But I think the key thing is if you go the inch below and the inch to one side of the navel, if you put in the needle as shown on the video, if anything comes out, I suppose it's as in the danger of piercing the bladder or anything like that, you're in the wrong place. But I suppose that the lamb you'd be administering that glucose injection to, I suppose if you do nothing, his life expectancy would be short, I'd say. So it's probably worth the go. But it's something, I suppose, maybe it might be no harm if you have if you got a vet to show you how to do it once before you'd attempt it. But there are people that are administering them themselves as well.
Just before we leave that one, Damian, it's a related question. When you're administering, the glucose have to be warmed up?
It's a good idea, yeah, to up to about 30 degrees. And again, the other thing that people often ask is, where do you get this glucose? Probably the handiest way to get it is in powder form. You get it in a lot of pharmacies or health stores. It's 100% dextrose. So you'd have 80 mils of sterile water, and the easiest way to do that is to boil the kettle and let it cool. So if you boil it and let it cool down to about 30 degrees and add your 20 grams or a spoon of the dextrose powder, it's 100% pure dextrose. It's glucose powder. It's often sold as it. I don't have any brand names off the top of my head, but the 30 degrees for best effect. So it's certainly, you know, the response will be quite rapid. As I say, if you find this lamb that's maybe over 5 hours old, or maybe almost a day old, and he's suffering from hypothermia, if you go warming him or go feeding him, the temptation sometimes can be to get a stomach tube and go feeding him. He doesn't have the energy. He doesn't have the energy reserves to process that. Or so it's the first step followed by warming, and then followed by feeding. But he should be up in half an hour if it works, really, after giving it to him and putting him in the warming box.
By trying down. That's
yes,
the basic thing. The last question, we're just running out of time, and my apologies, folks. We haven't answered them all, but we'll follow up with email answers tomorrow or the next day as much as we can. The last question, Damian, is a common one. Should a ewe be allowed to rear triplets? And if not, what's your own opinion, I suppose, on automatic feeders? Yeah,
it's not every ewe that's able to rear triplets. If you are leaving, if you feel a ewe will be able to rear triplets, they should be managed as a separate group entirely, and you'd have to supplement the ewe with about a half a kilogram of whatever your ewe and lamb nut is for 5 weeks afterwards. I'd be introducing creep to the lambs. Straight away as well, so that they'd be probably on creep right up to weaning. So that takes a little bit of pressure off the ewes. As I say, look at it, not every ewe that can do it, and there's lots of people doing it successfully. But the other thing then is that it can appear to be going fine for a week or two, and then a lamb will one lamb of the three may start falling behind. But it can be done, but they should be managed a completely separate group, and access to really good grass plus supplementation for the ewes and lambs after turnout. In regard to the automatic feeders, then I suppose there are people, there are there's management, I suppose, involved in them. There are varying different. There are fairly simple ones that cost maybe 200 or 300 euros that are just keep the milk warm. You mix the milk and put them in and fill them up once a day. And again, people are very successfully rearing lambs on those feeders. And they go right up into ones that are a couple of thousand for large flocks, where they're plumbed and they mix the milk themselves automatically. Just pretty much add the powder and it eats it. But look, they are working well. The one thing I'd say about them is are the people that have them say that at least they have a plan, I suppose, for dealing with, particularly in high scanning flocks, if they have lots of triplets and maybe they're doing a different thing with everyone. They maybe try and let off some of the ewes with triplets, and they're trying to cross foster more, and they're doing a whole load of different things, and then they still end up with pets. At least if they have a system, a proper setup for them, and one of the feeders that at least it takes the guessing out of it. You have a plan in place for the surplus lambs, I suppose.
Thanks, Damian. I'll hand back to Brendan to conclude, and thanks to both of you for presenting tonight.
So thanks very much there, Vivian. So we're just about out of time this evening, and indeed I'd like to thank our two speakers tonight, Liam Quinn there, Teagasc Advisor Westport, and Damian Costello there, a sheep specialist there in Teagasc Athenry. Thanks to Vivian there for handling all the questions. We have a lot of questions, and as Vivian said, we didn't get to them all tonight, but we will follow up with an email in the next day or two. We hope you found this webinar beneficial. We'll be getting the recording uploaded to the Teagasc Mayo YouTube channel in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. All that's left for me to say is that we will be back again next week, next Wednesday night, same time, with another episode. And on next Wednesday night, we will discuss farm succession planning with James McDonald there from Farms Financial Management Specialist there from Teagasc and Oak Park joining us, along with local education officer there, Aina Luckery from Teagasc and Ballinrobe, who will outline the benefits of completing the Green Cert. So that promises to be an interesting event there for all to tune into next Wednesday night, and the same link will work as usual. So from us all here in County Mayo tonight, all we'll say is keep safe and good luck with your lambing over the coming season. Good night, folks.
Yeah.